I'm Giovanni, and this is the County Commissioner's Court. Every Tuesday at 10 a.m., 4 county commissioners and a county judge meet here to pass ordinances and check on ongoing projects. Devin Allen, Roy Brooks, Gary Fickus, JD Johnson, and Glenn Whitley. Whitley isn't actually a judge, it's merely a title. The county judge and the county commissioners serve up to 4 years before they can be voted on again. There are no term limits. It was here in 2017 that the 287G agreement was passed by the county commissioners unanimously. So what is the 287G agreement?
So I remember, if I'm correctly, we kind of started back in 2017 with the whole thing with SB4, and I remember at the time I was with United for Worth, and we were really focused on SB4 at the time, and it wasn't until after that summer that somebody told one of our members that, do you know what 287G is? And of course at the time we didn't know. And of course we started talking about it, we started kind of saying what are we going to do about it. And at the time, of course, a lot of people were super tired from all the work with SB4. And at the end, we ended up deciding that it was best for us to just take a break and put that kind of in the back burner, and then come back and see what we could do about it. More into 2018, that's when we started a coalition with a couple of other groups. I remember it was Mavericks United from UTA, and it was Raíces, and then it was United for Worth and Faith in Texas. And we started getting together at Raíces offices, which at the time I think they had just rented. So they had a lot of empty spaces, and we started kind of talking how as a collective with different organizations, how we could bring awareness to 287G. Because at the time, nobody knew what it was. So we were okay, what are we gonna do about it? And so we started kind of brainstorming of things that we could do. And then that whole year we just started to kind of find more out of how it had been implemented, what it was, and things like that, because we didn't know much ourselves either. And then towards the end of that year, I remember people got super busy with work and things like that, because a lot of us were volunteers at the time. I remember a lot of people started missing the meetings. And so I remember that towards the end of the year, there were 2 meetings where it was literally Juana and I. There was nobody else there. It was literally just her and I. And at the time, I remember we were in her office, and we literally were just sitting there just alone. And we looked at each other and we were what are we gonna do, Juana? Literally the boat is coming up this next summer. It's almost December and we have nothing. No one's coming to the meetings. What are we gonna do, where are we going from here? And so right there and then we decided that we needed to completely just erase everything that we had thought about and just completely start from scratch. And that's what we did. I remember at the time United for Worth was having monthly meetings, and I started talking about 287G. That whole year we had been talking about it, kind of trying to get people informed about what 287G was, and at the same time kind of planting a seed on why is it that they want to get involved, why it is important for them to get involved. And we started going to meetings, and then we hyped everybody up. We were we're gonna start brand new, and it's gonna be huge, and it's gonna be great. And I remember we had the first meeting, the kickoff of the campaign at the Raíces office again. We had different committees that people could join, and we tried to make it really fun and very diverse for people, because people have different talents. So we wanted everybody to have something that they could join, right? We wanted to have art. If you're good at art, you could join that. We wanted to make it a place where you could bring any talent and you could be great at whatever you're good at. I remember we had a lot of people that day there. But I also remember that we realized that with what happened with the coalition could happen again, and I was like, we need to make sure that the people that do come in know that they have to be committed and that this is going to be hard work, and that if they're not here to give it their 100, then I mean, we can't, as harsh as it sounds, we can't have anything less than that. We knew where we wanted to get to, and we knew what we needed to get to that place, and we needed people that really wanted to do the work. We started having meetings, and just people kept showing up, and it just blossomed into something beautiful. And I remember we knew, like, when we started, that we were in some way gonna be trailblazers, because nobody knew what 287G was. So we knew that we were paving the way for other cities and other places that had the same type of agreement. And so we wanted to be the best and do the best that we could, and I think we did. I remember we started the house parties because we had tried so many different ways to get the affected community involved, and we weren't getting anywhere. So we were like, okay, what do we do? I remember we had like one time like a 5-hour meeting that went into like 12 or 1 in the morning. And we were just like brainstorming ideas on like what we could do to get the community involved. We started the house parties, and it was just beautiful. We would just show up to anybody that would let us borrow their house and just talk about 287G and try to get people educated about what it was. And so it went from me literally being the only one in the room who knew what 287G to other people knowing. I remember I would be at meetings and I would ask, does anybody know what 287G is? And nobody would know, like, raise your hand, and it would only be like me and the person that was with me that would raise their hand.
So the logo we initially had when we first started with ICE Out of Tarrant, and then we revamped it last year in 2020 before the commissioners meeting. And it was really, I mean, pretty similar. The idea of the monarch butterfly and keeping that in the logo was obviously very important. And the reason for that is because the monarch also really stands out among a lot of other things. It's the orange and the navy hopefully has become something that people recognize with us as an organization. It's so important to just the community in general. The colors just kind of came out of being vibrant and taking inspiration from what the monarch butterfly looks like, and using that, it has become this strong symbol for the undocumented community. We know that monarch butterflies migrate from place to place to survive, and of course immigrants do the same, and being able to have that right to do that freely has become a big part of who we are as an organization. And that's the reason it's such a strong symbol in all of our graphics and our logo.
The March and Rally was a moment where we celebrated the relationships we built with community. It was a moment where we reached out to all of the different groups that stood in solidarity for this intersectional movement that we are fighting for. It was a moment where we claimed space, where we celebrated the creativity of our community, and a moment where we really were just fighting for that vision for humanity that achieved justice and that held accountability to the 287G agreement, which continued to impact all of our community in Tarrant County.
So back when we did the march in 2019, we wanted to create some kind of meaningful visual that could have a direct impact and help us deliver our message in a really meaningful way. And so we decided to do a big butterfly and a bunch of little butterflies. And butterflies are kind of the symbol for migration, and they travel all over. They go from like Mexico, US, further south than that. And it was kind of just a really special moment. We spent a lot of time making this thing. It was gigantic, and we needed like 6 people to hold it. I think it was beautiful. I think it was a really nice way to kind of highlight our community our friends, our family. So we also did these smaller butterflies that we passed out. I can't remember how many we did exactly, but I think it was more than 30, something like that. But we did these little butterflies and we handed them out, and so it was kind of this like one big butterfly, and we had a bunch of little ones kind of just surrounding it, and it was this like huge crowd of beautiful orange things that we were carrying. We had a few orgs come out. ICE Out of Tarrant hosted some, and UFW. A lot of people came out. The Cesar Chavez group came out too. It was all kind of just supporting each other. There's a lot of intersectionality between a lot of our orgs and communities, and I think it's really important to be there for one another, and they were there for us. So
when we were organizing a couple years ago to get people to know what 287G was, one of the biggest efforts for us were the house parties. And house parties are really important when you're organizing, because that's one way to bring information to the people in the communities and to really engage with folks on issues that are very boring. I mean, and it's really something that is very abstract. What is 287G is something that it's hard to explain. And so for us to really connect with people and really do more than just, this is what 287G is. It was really about building relationships with people. It was about going into their homes, sharing food, being in a community space that is much more welcoming than a classroom where we're just teaching people what 287G is. And so house parties really brought people together in that way, and they were really a way for everyone to connect and to share their stories of how ICE has impacted their lives, of how immigration is important. And it's a really powerful tool that we've used and that we continue to see as something that you should use to engage with community. In organizing, it's always a challenge to bring people out to learn about something, especially when it's, like I was saying, very abstract. And so one method that we used to bring people to house parties was we went around a specific neighborhood. We chose a specific neighborhood, then went around and knocked on people's doors. And we passed out flyers, just kind of inviting them. We didn't get into what 287G was right then and there, because it, like I said, it's very abstract, something that's like, how does that even affect my life? So we went around and knocked on doors to invite people to house parties, and we connected that to personal stories. We said, I have loved ones affected by immigration, their immigration status, and there are several things in Fort Worth that go on that affect my family because of it. And so we really connected to those personal stories, to inviting folks to these house parties. And we started building relationships in that way, and bringing out the issues to the community instead of just advertising or just posting flyers in different places. We actually went out and talked to folks in order for them to show up and really feel connected to what we were talking about.
So a big part of what we do is try to keep our community informed of everything going on, and just any information they may need that I think is crucial, especially with 287G in place. I think one thing that we work hard on is keeping them informed on what 287G is, and then also just providing any resources on making sure they know their rights if they're ever pulled over or stopped, and who they can contact. That's become a big part of our process, and just keeping that information out there and available for them in multiple languages so they're able to get that information when they need it.
So we get into the 2008 election, and this is a moment where Billy Wayborn, who is a police chief from Dalworthington Garden, which is a city of barely 2,000 people, decides to run for the Tarrant County Sheriff's position for that election. This is kind of the introduction of Billy Wayborn and his nasty anti-immigrant rhetoric as he tries to challenge Sheriff D. Anderson. There's a discussion really about who Wayborn is, and this is really the start of Billy Wayborn's messaging on bad versus good, on undocumented folks, and how they're really dangerous in Tarrant County and Fort Worth. And this is really the place where he starts using this vile language of othering communities who are really at risk and are most vulnerable in Tarrant County. But it doesn't work. In 2008, Billy Wayborn actually lost that election in the primary versus D. Anderson. D. Anderson got like 61% of the vote. And this language, this messaging, this us versus them rhetoric really wasn't working, and it showed in 2008 that it really wasn't what community wanted. And D. Anderson, won that election clearly. And then comes 2016. After Billy's failed attempt to run for sheriff in 2008, he decides to run again in 2016. This is a different moment in America. This is a time where Donald Trump and his campaign is really pushing a very nationalist, white supremacist agenda that's centered on very anti-immigrant discussion. And this is a moment where Billy takes advantage of that.
Sheriffs are key figures in carrying out a white supremacist agenda through state violence. We see how sheriffs have continued to carry out local evictions, continue to lead to the perpetuation of the jail-to-deportation pipeline, which continues to affect the immigrant community here locally in Tarrant County. We also see how the role of the sheriff really is at the intersection of multiple areas of oppression that specifically continue to impact poor, working class people, Black and brown people in our communities, and people who struggle with mental health and substance use. And so the role of the sheriff really has significant impact, and that's why we've been fighting to push for a lot of changes that can achieve real justice, right, and that can lead towards abolition. Sheriffs really take away from a lot of resources in our community. They control and oversee county jails, which all of that funding can go back to our community on things such as healthcare, on housing and education, to really be able to support the community in which is continuously being impacted. What our community here in Tarrant County has been fighting for is for transparency, accountability, and justice from the Sheriff's Department to ensure that we can lead to transformative changes, to redirecting resources away from continuing policing, the jailing that's impacting our communities, which is inherently violent, and the militarization as to which the sheriff's role really continues to perpetuate and expand.
Tarrant County Sheriff Bill Wayborn is defending what he said at the White House today about undocumented immigrants held in his jail, and critics are really going after him. Here's Lauren Zacali.
It's an honor to be here, especially
at the White House Thursday morning. Tarrant County Sheriff Bill Wayborn joined the acting ICE director and gave a snapshot of the undocumented immigrants in his jail.
This morning we had 4,200 inmates. Out of that, 7% were illegal aliens.
But it's what he said next about undocumented immigrants in jail for DWI that has some people incensed.
Of those people that we have in custody, we know for a fact that 72% of them are repeat offenders. So if we have to turn them loose or they get released, they're coming back to your neighborhood and my neighborhood. These drunks will run over your children and they will run over my children.
And he needs to apologize and take those words back.
National LULAC President Domingo Garcia, speaking to us during a taping of Inside Texas Politics, is calling for Wayborn to resign.
When he accuses undocumented immigrants of being drunks who are going to run over your kids and his kids, it follows a dangerous rhetoric.
Jennifer DeHaro, managing attorney at Raices, says she's disappointed in Wayborn's words, but not surprised.
The truth of the matter is that these types of statements just further the belief that immigrants are criminals, and that has shown to not be true, in fact.
Does the sheriff stand by his comments?
Yeah, the sheriff stands by his comments that he made. I mean, a lot of them are being taken out of context.
The sheriff's chief of staff, David McClellan, says the sheriff wasn't referring to immigrants as a whole, but rather undocumented immigrants in jail for DWI. Of the 350 people in jail for DWI, around 60 have immigration holds, according to percentage estimates McClellan gave us.
We're getting multiple phone calls from both sides, and like I said, it's a hot button issue, and we accept that.
But he stands by those comments today.
We do stand by those comments.
In Fort Worth, I'm Lauren Zacalic.
So the sheriff was actually up for election for November 2020. We made a giant puppet, and we drove that puppet around different areas of Fort Worth, all throughout the community, not just even Fort Worth, all over Tarrant County. And we were using the puppet to sort of bring attention to the race and bring attention to the connecting themes between his rhetoric and what was actually happening at the national level.
We made this puppet with Donald Trump, Sheriff Bill Waybourn, and Judge Whitley, kind of just like one following each other, one after another. I don't think a lot of counties really know what kind of people are in charge, really. A lot of people don't really know who our sheriff was. And we made this puppet in order to kind of show our community who he was, what kind of message he was spreading, what kind of rhetoric he was spreading, what kind of agenda. Some people would honk their cars at us in full support. We also got a lot of backlash. I remember this one incident where this guy got out of his car in North Tarrant County, and he physically went to us and was heckling us and spitting at us and just telling us to go back to where we came from, basically. It kind of gave us the opening and like the visual that was necessary to have people start a conversation with us. Because of it, people came out, they sat down with us and talked to us, and people followed us, and we got a really good discussion and discourse happening. And as negative as these three people are, as hateful as these three people are, I think it was a good way to show them who they were.
We really wanted people to be aware of who the sheriff was, what his position was, what his role. We were not just carrying the puppet around as a sign of, symbol of him, but also to get attention from the public, to get people to come talk to us, and for us to inform them about the sheriff election that year and be able to tell them why he was running and what he was running for and why we wanted somebody different, why we wanted change. And then as part of his campaign, he was raising money and funds throughout the whole year to sort of get more money so he could get reelected. So he hosted a little fundraiser and whatnot, and we actually went outside of it, and we were there just being loud, just trying to shut it down, just really bringing attention to him, really shaming him for what he's done, really shaming all his donors, because they should be aware of what their money's going into. They should be aware of what the rhetoric he's pulling into. We had a bunch of signs, we had a lot of people, we had the megaphones out there. We were just making noise and spilling the truth of what exactly who he was, and trying to really demonstrate where his money, his campaign, all of it was leading to the separation of families, to the injustice done to our communities, to just who the sheriff was, what his message was, and who he was trying to portray to be.
What I'm seeing a lot and what I'm hearing a lot when I take calls from Tarrant County Jail is unsanitary and dangerous conditions. Some of those are people that are currently incarcerated are being held in their cells for over 20 hours and that they're on a rotation. That there have been multiple breakouts of COVID. There's also been allegations of cohorting, and what I mean by that is that people are telling me that they're mixing the unaffected population with the affected population that have tested positive for COVID. I'm also seeing that they're not offered cleaning supplies. So for example, we received a letter from a pregnant woman who shared in her letter that she tested positive for COVID. And when she did, she was placed in a cell with another individual, and that she had noticed that there were feces on her mat, so she had requested cleaning supplies to clean it. As a response to that, all she was given was a wet paper towel. We're also seeing people that have made complaints about not being able to shower for days, up to even 10 days. There's also been complaints about small portions and lack of nutritious foods. I've heard that commissary is inconsistent and that sometimes people have to wait every other week or longer to go to commissary or to actually purchase items from commissary. And so those are a few of the conditions that I have heard from Tarrant County Jail. In regards to the treatment of people that are at Tarrant County Jail, there have been a few things that I've seen. So for one, medical neglect. People are having longer wait times to be able to receive medical attention. So for example, there was one incarcerated individual who told me they had to wait 6 to 8 weeks for a tube abscess. And as a result of that infection actually is now in their bone. There's a discontinuity of care. And what I mean by that is that people are having
their care interrupted. A lot of times they're not receiving the medications that they need, or the medications that they were receiving prior to being booked are being discontinued, or they're not receiving any medication at all. That's in the case for, any physical conditions or even mental illness. There are a couple people that reached out to me letting me know that they've waited over 2 months to receive the vaccine, and I'm uncertain if they have yet to receive the vaccine. And so there's that curiosity of what's going on. If people incarcerated in there are testing positive still, and they're still on rotation, and that they're still in quarantine, why are they not receiving the vaccine if they're putting in a request for it? So Tarrant County overspends a significant amount of their county budget towards the sheriff's office and confinement. So for the fiscal year 2021, the county approved a budget for the sheriff's office of $93.9 million for confinement, compared to $9.7 million for community services. And for this upcoming fiscal year, for 2022, that budget has increased to $100.8 million compared to $10 million for community services. That amount is such a stark difference, but also the fact that the public isn't educated on on these budgets and how they can take a stand to combat these disparities.
So according to the 287G agreement and Tarrant County's memorandum of understanding between the Sheriff's Department and ICE, the criteria for receiving an ICE detainer issued by Tarrant County Sheriff's Office is that a person must be booked into the county jail for a Class B misdemeanor and above charge. We have found that the people that we have been studying in regards to their 287G cases, we have found that these people were being charged for Class B misdemeanors and above. However, ever since the Sheriff's Department ended the practice of publicly disclosing who was being issued ICE detainers for what charges, we are once again concerned that the Sheriff's Department might be in a state where they can abuse this agreement to issue ICE detainers for folks that are being charged for lower convictions than Class B misdemeanors. And what concerns us is that there's no way of us knowing for sure who is being issued ICE detainers and for what charges, while the Sheriff's Department retains so much control over what information is being disclosed and in what methods. The lack of transparency takes on much more alarming factors, not only because we are not able to find this information for ourselves or even through open records requests, but also because we believe that the Sheriff's Department can in fact abuse so many methods of 287G through their unwillingness to disclose information. And we have seen historically that they have abused this agreement in many ways, not only with holding people for more than 48 hours and other methods. Now we simply have no idea if they're actually following through with their own agreement to only issue ICE detainers for people with Class B misdemeanors and above. And this issue becomes even more concerning because folks are very much hesitant as it is to receive benefits from the county government, such as, the COVID-19 vaccine, because of the fact that many of these vaccination locations are predominantly staffed by law enforcement personnel. And this is an intimidating factor for many people. Many folks don't even want to receive the vaccine because of this presence, because they know that in Tarrant County, the agreement exists between the local law enforcement agencies and ICE, and many people are very much intimidated and afraid of the fact that if they come in contact with these people and the conversation goes awry in any way, then that can risk their own deportation.
So the jail-to-deportation pipeline is a system that works to funnel undocumented immigrants from the point they come into contact with the legal system into ICE. This pipeline and the system often leads to and contributes to mass incarceration, to detention, to deportation, and has resulted through the contact with the county jails to the deaths of many people in our community. And we have seen in Tarrant County how a lot of people have been impacted as a result of negligence and as a result of the conditions that an inherently violent place like that has on their lives. Black and brown people are more likely to be stopped by the police, and we know that structural and systemic inequalities exist that make Black and brown people more vulnerable to things like surveillance, policing, harassment, and exile. And oftentimes what happens is that the most vulnerable people affected by these systems do not fit the exceptional immigrant model that is preferred by U.S. immigration policy. And so that usually results to oftentimes things like criminal-based deportations, which disproportionately affects these communities. This pipeline starts usually when community members have contact with law enforcement, with police. And as a result of that, they usually are then put into the pipeline, which results to things like the arrest and booking process, to then being placed in removal proceedings, to then being transferred to detention, and eventually possibly to deportation. And so there are many points in which as a community there is room for advocacy to be able to fight to protect our immigrant community and to ensure that we are intervening and disrupting this pipeline. There are systemic forms that feed into this pipeline, and this is where we see things like secure communities, things like CAP, and also things like SB4 in Texas, and ICE detainers and holds that exist here in our communities. These forms of systemic types of impact are what really feed into the larger pipeline that results to sometimes deportations. We also see different forms of contractual agreements in the communities that exist, and these are partnerships with ICE that affect us. This is where we see things like the Intergovernmental Service Agreement in Dallas, for example, known as IGSA, Warrant Service Officers Program, and the 287G Agreement, which exists here in Tarrant County. And what's so important to understand about that is that it's a voluntary program, so it doesn't have to exist in our communities. And all of these forms of impact, right, are really what continue to feed into the pipeline to deportation. So many communities in our community here in Tarrant County are fighting for the collective liberation of everyone who is being affected by the criminal legal system. And we understand that no one should be behind a cage and that no one should undergo the type of violence of an inherent space like the jails and detention centers. And so, we're fighting for a vision towards abolition, a vision in which everyone can be free and is not impacted by these systems that continue to disproportionately affect Black and brown people in our communities.
1 month into the COVID-19 pandemic, we wanted to bring attention to the 287G process and the dangerous conditions that people were put into when they're being held in the immigration detention centers in these conditions because of the coronavirus. So at that time, the sheriff and the governor of Texas were actually blaming immigrants for spreading the virus, but the immigration systems and the jails that they're responsible for were really making the problem much worse because they were stuck in these small spaces. So for example, in the first month of the pandemic, March 2020, a 22-year-old from Guatemala came to the US to seek asylum, and they received the coronavirus while in Alvarado, Texas at Prairie Lane Detention Center, and shortly after that she passed away while in custody. So we wanted to bring attention to the Prairie Lane Detention Center because it's technically outside of Tarrant County, but people don't realize how close this private prison is right here to Fort Worth, Texas. So it's less than an hour away, and this is where people can kind of go and then they disappear into the criminal justice system, and it's so hard for them to get help and have the real fair justice that they deserve. So we did this by a car caravan protest. We wanted the participants to be safe. So we were distanced, we were all wearing masks, and we were in our cars safely. So we put messages on our windows with shoe polish, and we drove around the city for about an hour and approached the gates of the detention center as well. We tried to give our demands to the security guards at the gates, and they refused and ordered us to back away, or else they were going to arrest us.
Today, ICE Out of Tarrant Coalition is standing in solidarity alongside community advocates and partnership organizations to speak up against the inhumane and unavoidable dangers that detainees are facing as coronavirus continues to spread. About 30 days ago, the state of Texas mandated a stay-at-home order, but there are some that cannot adhere to those regulations. If they do not take the preventative measures to protect themselves from the risk of dying, are in grave danger. Think of the people who do not have the same liberty to do so. The risk of contamination in enclosed facilities is very high, and detainees are far more vulnerable to coronavirus outbreaks. It is clear that CDC recommendations of practice are impossible to follow. We must raise our voices as a community to ensure dignity and the worth of every person to receive basic needs. We are here in solidarity to echo their calls for freedom and call on our officials to free them all. Every day that our brothers and sisters continue to be detained is a matter of life and death. We will continue to fight until they are all free. Join us and demand they free them all.
My role with ICE Out of Tarrant has predominantly been handling the various open records requests that we have submitted to Tarrant County Sheriff's Office to try to find some semblance of transparency regarding the administration of the 287G agreement. As many people know, by federal law, open records requests or public information requests are federally mandated by any law enforcement agency or federal organization to provide information that the general public or your constituents request in order to preserve a much more transparent and much more community oversought administration of anything that the law enforcement agency in question or federal agency is handling at the moment. With Tarrant County Sheriff's Office and the administration of 287G, that has not exactly been the case. So since the agreement's inception in 2017, Tarrant County Sheriff's Office has entered into an agreement with ICE that requires yearly reviews of 287G pertaining towards a community meeting where members of the community that have a high invested interest in 287G are supposed to partake in these meetings and speak with the Sheriff's Department regarding what their thoughts are on the agreement, how it's affecting their communities, their neighbors, their livelihoods. To date, ICE Out of Tarrant County has actually not been invited to any one of these meetings, which we believe is an intentional practice by the Sheriff's Department to prevent the information that we have been gathering regarding the agreement from entering into a position where it would be detrimental towards the agreement's administration. So in 2019, ICE Out of Tarrant started an open investigation regarding the administration of the 287G agreement using the Sheriff's Department's daily booked-in reports that they publish daily on the Tarrant County websites, where they would publicly disclose the information regarding who is being booked into jail on certain days, for what charges, etc., etc. What we did was analyze every booked-in report that was published on those days, where we would actively search for the people who are being issued ICE detainers by the Tarrant County Sheriff's Office through the 287G agreement. We put together a list of these folks who are being issued ICE detainers, and using that to break down who was being issued ICE detainers for what charges, by what numbers, in order for us to understand more of what the agreement entails and how the administration is carried out through the Sheriff's Department. In 2020, it became a public vested interest regarding the amount of time that folks were spending in jail because of ICE detainers. The Sheriff's Department was very adamant about enunciating that people who were issued ICE detainers were only held for 48 hours within the jail. Now, that's actually one of the mandates of 287G and ICE, the practice of issuing ICE detainers as well, is that law enforcement agencies are not allowed to hold people for more than 2 days under ICE detainers. Using the daily booked-in reports and actively searching people's information on the Tarrant County website through the inmate search function, we actually put together a list of people who spent much more than 48 hours within the county jail under an ICE detainer. In the beginning, we figured that these people were being held for more than 48 hours because of other charges that were apart from 287G, such as, the charges that they were booked into the jail for, if they were having to spend time prior to their arraignments, the court dates, etc. However, we actually managed to find one person who spent time in the jail simply because of the ICE detainer and was in the jail for more than 14 days. We realized that this person was held in the jail because of the sole fact of the ICE detainer, because this person actually had their bond paid the very next day that they were arrested. However, we managed to find information that tipped us off to the fact that this person spent over 14 days within the jail. And what we did was publish a report regarding this person's case and other cases that we found that were similar to this person. And we used this information to send it to the commissioners, namely Commissioner Devin Allen and Commissioner Roy Brooks, to inform them that this is something that the Sheriff's Department is carrying out through 287G, that obviously is not a policy that they need to be, that they should be administering. What happened about 2 days later after this report went public, and when the Commissioner Allen actually called for a public meeting on 287G, we realized that the Sheriff's Department ended their practice of publicly disclosing on the daily booked-in reports who was being issued ICE detainers. And we believe that this was intentionally done to prevent us from administering any further investigations on 287G. April 2020, when the pandemic is ravaging the county jail and our neighborhoods and other communities, what we wanted to initially find regarding the 287G agreements administration was information regarding who was being tested for COVID-19 prior to being sent to ICE custody. So with the help from organizations such as the Texas Jail Project and the ACLU of Texas, we were able to acquire the policies that the Sheriff's Department adopted to mitigate the spread of COVID-19 within the jail. One of those practices stated that any person that's booked into the county jail is quarantined for 14 days where they're actively tested for COVID-19 before they're released to general population. Our concern with the 287G agreements pertain to the people who were booked into the county jail and sent to ICE custody, sometimes 2 days later, sometimes 1 day later, sometimes the same day. What we wanted to find was who was being tested for COVID-19 within the jail before actually being sent to ICE, because obviously them spending time within the jail and spending time with other people who were likely positive for COVID-19 could expose them to the disease as well before they were released to the various detention centers that ICE administers. We submitted an open records request for this information, where we asked the Sheriff's Department for any information that they could offer us or that they should be able to disclose regarding how many people were being sent to ICE on certain weeks, and how many of these folks spent time in the quarantine section of the jail, and also if these folks were even tested for COVID-19 before being sent to ICE, and if any of these folks tested positive for COVID-19 before being sent to ICE. Now, the Sheriff's Department denied that open records request through the County District Attorney's Office, Sharon Wilson. Sharon Wilson actually sent that request up to Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton for his opinion regarding the request. Ultimately, it was denied. What our open records request was asking for were numbers regarding how many people were being sent to ICE on a weekly basis and how many of these numbers were being tested for COVID-19. Their denial was justified by them by the fact that a federal law dictates that public information cannot disclose names of people that are under ICE investigations. Now, our public information request did not request names, simply numbers, simply the amount of people that were being sent, and they used that to justify the fact that they could deny that request before we were able to find that information. This information is extremely important for us at the moment to acquire, because 287G and the administration of the agreements and people being sent to ICE from our county jail has quickly turned into a public health issue, much more than it was before, because of the fact of COVID-19 being carried out throughout the jail. And what we are trying to figure out now is how many of this community are being sent to ICE without even being tested for COVID-19 before being sent to ICE. And the investigation is still continuing today, where we've submitted other open records requests that have been denied, even though when we publicly made this information up to their concern during our action in June of 2021, where I actually presented these questions to the Commissioner's Court, where Judge Whitley responded by saying that if we want this information, we can submit a public information request. We've done so, but it's been denied.
All right, so 2020 was, a COVID year, so it was a different year. The pandemic was happening, so the Commissioner Court switched over to being all virtual, and that had sort of been happening for, almost a whole year by that point. And it was also an election year that year, so we were already building a community with ICE Out of Tarrant, and we were really getting involved with some of the public comments as well as some of the voting outreach and whatnot for like the general election and the local election as well for the sheriff run and whatnot. So it was just like a lot of stuff was happening that year, even though a lot of the meetings were switched over to virtual and we were able to still submit comments every Tuesday. It was all virtual at this point. And then sort of building up on that momentum, we found out that that final meeting for the 287G renewal contract was actually going to be in person, which was really odd because they've been doing virtual this entire time. Like every other important issue that had come up to that court has all been virtual except for this one. The Commissioner's Court and the judge specifically decided that this year, for some reason, and for that single meeting, it was all going to be in person. You couldn't submit a virtual comment, you couldn't submit anything written. It was all, if you wanted to make your voice be heard, you had to be present. And that was like a blowback. Like, first of all, it's on a Tuesday during the day. A lot of the people that's affected by this, a lot of the people that want to make comments can't just take, a Tuesday off during the day and be there all day. And on top of that, it's a pandemic year. So not only did they expect you to take time off of your busy work schedule, come in to make a comment, to have your voice heard, but they also want it to be at the sake of you risking and putting yourself in danger of, the pandemic happening. It was still like great for the community to show up. It was just really disheartening that even though we kept putting on the pressure and even though we were being present and we were showing ourselves up, they still wanted even more. So they created new rules, but we still managed the community to come out. We still had a great showing, and they were there for a long time. We had to wear masks, we had to rotate in and out, and then sort of the vote happened, and in lieu of how the Commissioner's Court is, they changed the rules again, and not only were the comments just one day, they're deciding that same vote that exact same day, and the court ruled against it. They voted 3 against 2, and the contract stayed renewed. But this time it was different, and this time it was like why we found it so wild, because instead of it being like a yearly contract they would be able to sort of sign every year and review and talk about, and we would be able to show up every single time. Instead, this time the rules changed again. They're supposed to have an annual review of it, which, spoilers for 2021, didn't ever happen. It was never scheduled, it was never talked about. It just came by the anniversary and nothing came from that. Since they took that day away from us, it's been really hard, and unfortunately we've sort of been in a limbo with it, really, because before we used to have a date that we could get our community rallied against and get people to show up. We had the marches, we had the comments, we had everybody show up, even in the middle of pandemic, and unfortunately they just took that away from us, and they promised us a renewal, a second opportunity every year for us to express our comments, but that never came. This is just not just like a one-time single issue that happens through the Commissioner's Court. There's more issues out there. There's a lot more problems in the Commissioner's Court, and we were just one of the groups that decided to engage with it and try to push back. And clearly They saw the pushback. They saw how much of the community we built around them. And that's why they had to change the rules. They couldn't keep it the same way because we kept getting bigger and louder and louder. So until they finally had to silence us and put us in this weird state where we couldn't speak about it out anymore. But we're still here and we're still speaking out about it, and we're even doing even more. This is like an intersectionality issue. It's not just, brown people, it's black and brown people. It's all types of people from all types of life that come and, get affected by this. Some of the deportations that have happened in the recent time have all been from Haitian immigrants here. So it's not just an issue of certain people. It's an issue of all of us. It's all of our communities that are being affected. It's all of our communities that need the help. And that's, what we want to urge you to do. Because ICE Out of Tarrant started out as this sort of small group of a couple of local people that were concerned, and they slowly gathered more people that were concerned, and they slowly informed more people, and they informed more people, and they reached out to more of a community member, and like anybody and everybody has joined it now, and we're all, open arms, trying to help in any way we could, and it's just been great. It's been really refreshing. It's one of my favorite parts about ICE Out of Tarrant is the fact that we started with almost nothing and no one, and nobody even knowing what 287G was, to even now, like this huge momentum behind it with lots of people, lots of work, and all these people work. Even though 287G is in a weird state, doesn't mean that these people haven't stopped looking for other things to do. A lot of our team members have joined other communities, and they have joined other people, and it's just really wild to see the type of leadership we have grown, and it's now influencing other organizations to sort of look at what the Commissioner's Court's doing, to look at what the elected officials are doing, to hold more people accountable, to do other efforts, to join other organizations, to deal with other issues that are affecting not just our community, but all the communities. Anybody who has a voice should be able to speak up and be able to use their voice. And that's what ICE Out of Tarrant really encourage, for all of us to use our voice and our power to hold people responsible, to help each other, and to just really be there for each other, to build a true community.
To you, the one with the fire spirit. To you, the warrior whose power has been pushed down. To you, the gentle caretaker of others. To you, the one who fights their daily fights by merely existing. So we exist. So we exist in an existence where we all link arms, in an existence where we all fight, in an existence where we cry. As our tears have dropped onto an abysmal space, our fists and voices have been raised. We fight for an existence where we have peace. We fight for an existence where we love above all. We fight. Daily, we fight. But daily, we choose to love our community with our whole, to become whole as we form one with our home, a home we've built on our tears, a home we've built with our shouts, a home we've built with time, and a home we've built with our souls. And with that same time, our home will stay.